the natural propensity and the understandable propensity of firms is they want to be the success. And they don't necessarily, no firm is really that interested in creating the preconditions for other firms to enter their industry, even though it's often not zero sum. I mean, the world market is a huge thing. So, and so I think I think a key question is, how do we create a dynamic in which the government is listening to and supporting, emerging industries in a way that focuses on productivity and not profitability?
And it's really hard for even me to imagine. Like, how would you identify productivity without thinking of profitability?
I just hope everybody understood what I'm saying, because the natural instinct of a firm is, if I'm going to ask the government something, I prefer to ask it for something that enhances my profitability, like a tax break, and not my productivity, like better infrastructure.
I get it.
Right? And so what you want is industries, if you think, what's the acceptable ask of an industry, right? The difficulty is in a weakly institutionalized environment in politics, the acceptable ask is just give me a unique monopoly over this industry, or
give me money,
or just give me money, like give me a subsidy, right? Give me, or tax breaks are the equivalent of giving us money, and therefore you create a negative dynamic, because a successful firm that becomes successful by having asked the government favors that enhance its profitability and not its productivity,
it's at the expense of others, right?
It's at the expense of
It's
others.
not public good. It's like
exactly.
You give to one, you take from another.
Exactly. Whereas if you create a dynamic, again, what you want to think is, we want to create where the government's listening to the needs of industry, but where the only acceptable ask is enhancing productivity. And if you focus on the acceptable ask is, we need, better infrastructure. Well, that's something that's going to have umbrella-like effects. If I open the umbrella for you, other people get shade.
So you have this really nice framework where you talk about firms that focus on exports versus the one. So I really like that. Could you talk me through it, please?
No, we kind of distinguish between, between people that are export-oriented and people that are domestic market, and industries that are competitive and industries that tend to be restricted. And so a key distinction becomes between what we call power brokers, who are people that use their power both economically and politically to create profitability for themselves, mostly in non-tradable industries.
Right.
So I was just talking to a colleague of mine that's studying governments and what governments are doing, and governments are often involved in the hotel industry.
Right.
It's like, of all the industries that you might think, is really a high productivity use of government resource, hotels is not one of them.
Right.
But it's an industry that often crowds in power brokers. Because if I'm going to build a luxury hotel that's going to attract high clientele, I need a lot of cooperation.
Right.
And so powerful people are often doing non-tradable things that aren't dynamic, aren't, expanding the frontier of the economy, and are often doing it in ways that impose costs on the rest of the economy. So in the competitive domestic sector, we call them workhorses. People who are trying to just make a living and don't have power, they often have to pay the costs of high infrastructure, because the infrastructure industry is dominated by power brokers, or they have to pay the, costs of,
So if you're a competitive firm in a domestic, you're a workhorse.
Right, you're a workhorse, right? And again, the informal sector, no
SMEs,
part
small,
of India's challenge is that people don't work hard, right? I mean, I have never, when I very first came to India, it struck me as like, this is an unbelievably dynamic, hardworking place.